This podcast may contain explicit language.
Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan. Or am I?
Well, on that same note, we also welcome the ghost of... Wait a minute. Did our resident Scooby-Doo villain pull off his mask to reveal a nearly middle-aged nerd from St. Louis? Oh my God, it's the host of the Revisionist Almanac himself, Andrew Corns.
Ruh-roh. You're too much.
Yeah, making your full debut now. I mean, you've been on kind of one episode, and you keep trying to float that you want half credit for each of the two ghost lists you've submitted so far this season. I don't know if Dana will let that pass the gatekeeper, but you have at least been on one confirmed episode. That was our post-reaction show to the Oscars this year. That was our live episode on YouTube, and that we simultaneously released as an audio episode. But that means you have to go through the first-time guest questions. So first up,
I'm nervous.
Tell us a little about yourself and why you love movies.
Well, I'm Andrew, and I'm the host of the Revisionist Almanac, which is a show that looks back on past Oscar ceremonies with the luxury of hindsight to determine what they got right and what they got wrong. And I love movies because who in the hell doesn't love movies? I mean, it's a silly question, right?
No, unfortunately, I work with too many people that are like, you're a movie person? Why? It seems like a dying art form that you're now, like what the AV guys were in high school, now we are as the adults in the room.
I suppose so, but anyone who's listening to this episode obviously loves movies,
Well,
so
yes.
I'm really preaching to the choir at this point.
Yeah, I have no idea why you'd be listening to this podcast if you didn't love movies, because even my family, who does like movies, not necessarily love to the obsessive quality that the three of us do, but like movies, don't listen to this show. So if I can't get my own mother, who's been on the show at least like a half dozen times, to listen to this show just out of the goodness of her heart, how can I expect anybody else to listen that doesn't love movies?
Exactly.
And she supposedly loves us.
I know, it's kind of alleged, but we'll grill her on her next episode, whenever that may be. In fact, I think she's going to do a 4-way episode that we have teased with a guest that's been on both of our shows, and that would be V.
Ooh, excited to hear V back on the show.
Ironically, she's doing Rear Window.
Yeah, she did warn me of that, yes.
Yeah. Back on point. Number 2, what is your favorite movie and why? And if you say The Departed, you might get bonus points.
It is 100% not The Departed, but we're at least on the right track to the answer. And it's Goodfellas. It's been my favorite movie for, I don't know, 20 plus years at this point, since I was a young, impressionable teen. And I think it was the first time I saw a movie where I fundamentally understood that there was a director behind the scenes doing stuff. You know, I just understood film at a different level when I saw Goodfellas for the first time. And it's just one of those movies that has made an impression on my life in so many ways. And it's one that I can go back to so often, catch it whenever it's on TV for people who still watch TV these days. You know, if I see 30 minutes of it, I'm turning it on. It's my go-to. It's comfort food. And
ironically, and I mean this as absolutely no joke, that's the exact same way I talk about The Departed.
Goodfellas is much better than The Departed, but
okay, sure.
I know where Dana stands, and I have issue with that, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Number 3, what makes a good movie for you?
How the hell do people answer this question? I mean,
I answer it very simply. Usually it has to do narrative consistency. For me, I like something that has a very consistent storytelling device. I mean, you can go off the beaten path and do some different choices, play around with the timeline, because obviously I enjoy Tarantino movies. I enjoy Christopher Nolan movies where he's constantly playing with how the narrative is told. But as long as there's some central story, we're moving the plot in some fashion. And I'm also, in shout out to our mutual friend, Kieran. He often is critical of manipulative scores, but I am all here for all those just bombastic manipulative scores. Every single time they get me. Sorry, that's just me.
I don't know. I mean, when you asked this question, it was so open-ended, I didn't even know how to start processing it. I mean, I don't think there's one answer I could put my finger on. I love Caddyshack, which has no narrative whatsoever. It's just basically 90 minutes of joke telling and little skits here and there, and that doesn't bother me, and I love it for what it is. But then I love a movie like an Andrei Tarkovsky film, a director who you guys didn't give the love to on your director pantheon, but a big, long, deep thinking film that leaves me, pondering life itself. There's a lot of different things, so I don't know if I could put my finger on what makes a good film to me. It's just right place, right mood, right time. It could be really anything.
Final question. Is Martin Scorsese's movie to be inducted in The Departed or not?
It's not The Departed. It's not even Goodfellas as much as I consider it my favorite movie. Taxi Driver is his best film, I think, objectively speaking.
And that's what I've said too. Even though Taxi Driver is much more difficult to watch than most of his other films. The other ones are much more gripping. They allow you to kind of have an entry point. You think some of the characters are cool. Taxi Driver is, to me, the one that elevates much above the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I love Raging Bull too, but I think that's a little too niche, and there's a couple other shout-outs you could go with Scorsese. But I think Taxi Driver is the one that kind of defines who he is, what he is, his love of New York. Everything is kind of distilled into that film for me.
And to tease my upcoming appearance on our 2005 pod that we're recording next week, Raging Bull, not a sports movie.
I'll also nominate King of Comedy for Scorsese.
Yeah, After Hours too. He's got so many great ones in the 80s.
The Irishman isn't cutting it for you, Dad?
Gotta love Jerry Lewis.
Do you? Do you have to?
Yes, you do.
I'm surprised he didn't get the veto in the director pantheon. I thought for sure Dana was going to save him.
I almost did.
It was hard to pin him down on one where, without just being completely trolly, that he was going to have like some vehement objection to. Like if I had thrown out Mel Brooks really early on, that obviously would have gotten under his skin. But I don't even believe that. That would have just been for the sake of trolling. And at least one of us took the whole pantheon seriously.
I took it very seriously. I just decided
not by the list I'm looking at
that were on the edge that I knew you would object to. I took early, so I'd force you to use up all of your vetoes so that I could then control the board. It's called strategy.
Strategery.
I see. Sure. And that's how we end up with Sam Raimi being the last actual cut.
Or Wes Craven making the 50.
Yeah, that's... yeah. That was not by my design. You can all blame him. I would have much rather kept John Hughes or Brian De Palma, and I couldn't save all of them. Anyway, to the issue at hand, tonight for our 210th episode, we discuss the noir mystery, Gaslight. Wait, that's the movie we're doing?
I didn't think so.
Shit, did I prepare for the wrong one? Nope, that's right. Okay, excuse me, I did do Gaslight. Okay. Celebrating its 80th anniversary this week. Directed by George Cukor, written by John Van Druten, Walter Reich, and John L. Balderston. Music by Bronislaw Kaper, starring Charles Boyer as Gregory Anton / Sergius Bauer. Ingrid Bergman as Paula Elquist Anton. Terry Moore as the 14-year-old Paula, uncredited. Joseph Cotton as Brian Cameron. Mae Whitty as Miss Bessie Thwaites. Angela Lansbury in her first ever role as Nancy Oliver. Barbara Everest as Elizabeth Tompkins. Emile Rameau as Maestro Guardi. And Heather Thatcher as Lady Mildred Delroy. Recognition for this movie? Gaslight was originally released on May 4th, 1944, meaning it just celebrated its 80th anniversary last week. A remake of the British film from 1940 and the stage play, Gaslight, on a budget of roughly $2 million, would gross over $4.5 million during its run, which would have put it behind only Going My Way and Meet Me in St. Louis for that year. Generally well received.
Did you just call it St. Louis?
That is how the film pronounces the name, yes. That is how the song goes.
Hit me right in the heart.
Not my words, not my pronunciation. Anyway, generally well received by critics of the time, Gaslight would be nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Actor for Charles Boyer, Supporting Actress for Lansbury, Screenplay and Cinematography for Black and White Cinematography. It would win for Actress for Ingrid Bergman and Art Direction in Black and White. The film has since been recognized as a classic, earning its place at number 78 on AFI's Top 100 Thrills. Gaslighting, a colloquialism loosely defined as manipulating someone into questioning their own perception of reality, has become a recognized form of controlling and manipulative behavior. It involves an exploitative person manipulating people who suspect him or her into doubting themselves and questioning their own perceptions so that they distrust their own suspicions of the manipulator. By the 2020s, this behavior would be classified as a form of psychological abuse. Just to keep that in mind tonight, everybody. Gaslight currently holds an 89% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 78 score on Metacritic, and a 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
This is a movie that was on my radar for a long time. And it just happened to be on Turner Classic Movies, because I go through on Sundays and we'll go through Turner for the week. And if there's a film that I'm aware of that I wanted to see and haven't, I'll just record it. And I recorded it, and it was, I believe, a Friday night. It was your mom and grandma, and I suggested we watch it, and so we did. And so that was about 2 years ago, I think.
Oh, no. So if this is your story, this is you and the two of them, and I watched this about a year ago.
Okay, you were there too?
So if that was your first time, it was also my first time.
I thought it was longer than a year ago, but okay.
No, I want to say it was like last August or something. And it's a movie that obviously with the modern terminology that I've kind of danced around and had it on kind of my short list for a while, but just hadn't gotten the gumption to actually watch it. So sometime last summer, because it's become this revolving thing. Every time we want to sit down for a movie, nobody ever can actually pick something to watch. So I've just kind of taken the reins every time we want to pick something, and they just finally give up and let me have control of the remote, because normally I'm not picking stuff that I know nobody else is going to like. I'm not picking some Michael Haneke movie that only I might appreciate. It's just not going to happen. But we watched this probably about last August, and I only watched it the second time now for the episode. So we'll save
Did you
opinions.
actually make it through on a Friday night without falling asleep?
I'm not entirely certain. I might have dozed off here or there. I know I have a tendency to doze off during movies on Friday, Saturday evenings.
Yes, we all sit around and snicker because you snore really loud.
Sorry. I am my father's son.
Yeah, okay.
Acorns, what is your first relationship to this movie?
I don't know if I could pinpoint the first time I saw it. It was most certainly with my dad, who had this horrible habit when I was a kid, probably, I don't know, 12, 13, 14. It was long ago enough that people had to like watch one TV in the house or whatever. And my dad had this habit. He was the oldest in the house. He controlled the remote, and he would sit us down and be like, hey, you have to watch this old black and white TCM movie. And, 12, 13, 14, I'm like, what the hell are we doing? I would rather watch anything on earth other than this. So I know I watched it with my dad at some point, and then it just like gone out of the memory bank. Didn't go back to it for a long time. I don't know. Watched it a few years ago randomly, and then for this podcast, I've watched it 4 times in a week. So yeah, I don't have a good first memory of it. It was in that period of time where I just was not in the mood to watch a bunch of old ass movies, but now I've reached the age where I want to appreciate those movies a lot better.
So do you have a hinge point where you can say definitively, this is the breaking point between when I was younger and I acted like I only wanted to watch certain movies that were action heavy, had a lot of stunt work and other things that kept my ADHD at bay, and the adult obsessive Andrew Corns that we know and love that's going to break 1,000 movies watched this calendar year?
Lots of commercials. It was, I don't know, I was probably 17 or 18 when I like distinctly remember going to the library and getting the Barry Lyndons of the world and the Scorsese movies and all of these sort of like cultural French connection. I'm just thinking of like these sort of, I kind of gravitated towards 70s films first. And that was that that era and that decade where I thought film, was worth really studying. So it was probably 17, 18 when I really got into it. And then as I've gotten into my 20s and now I'm into my 30s, it's just kind of ratcheted up more and more each year. And now I just kind of like voraciously consume all and everything in my sight, which is probably not good for my mental well-being, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, and I've told this story multiple times on the show that I think my delineation point is ironically The Departed, where I started to really get into adult movies. I'd obviously watched other ones before that because I'd seen a bunch of 2005 movies that I just recently rewatched for the show we're going to be working on. But they didn't have quite the same allure that some of the other ones started to have, and where I really started to get involved in more, oh, this is going to be nominated for something. This is what a best picture is supposed to be. That kind of thing, where it just kind of clicked all of a sudden and you became kind of the movie nerd.
Yeah, Gladiator is another one that stands out for me because I would have been 15 at the time, and I distinctly remember my brother and I obsessively watching that, and then it went on to win Best Picture. That might have been the first time I really saw a Best Picture winner and kind of like understood the size and the scope and everything that went on behind the scenes. So right in that 15 to 17 range is when it really kind of hit for me.
Dad, was it like 1982 for you?
No, it was before that because my dad made me watch The Dirty Dozen. And from then on, I had a special suicide squad for my little plastic army men. I took a whole team of them and I even painted them so that they stood out from the other plastic army men. And I had the whole thing set up so that it was always like The Dirty Dozen.
So what you're saying is you have an affinity for certain 1967 movies.
That was before that. That was 65, wasn't it?
Dirty Dozen is 67.
Was it 67?
I thought I
Okay.
had it on my list for our 67 episode.
I just know that it ended up causing Jim Brown to retire because they had a production overrun and Paul Brown started fining him every day he was out of camp, and so he said, "Screw you, I retire."
Yeah, June 15th, 1967. So he would have retired for the 66 season.
All right.
I mean, you should know that we did cover it previously, like episode 12 or something. Going back 4 years, 4 long years ago. Anyway. So, then what is this movie about?
Greed, manipulation, and spousal abuse. Kind of like a certain trial that's going on right now.
That's going to be way too topical for anybody listening to this 6 months from now.
I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon, sadly.
I don't know. I kind of look at it as a early psychological thriller where you come to question your own reality within the movie. Because while I think it's very winking at what's going on screen, there are still a few times like, how did he get the brooch back that you just can't quite figure out? And so you start to question, did she actually lose it or not? So I think the movie does a good job of trying to pull you and start to question what is actually going on screen.
There are several times in the film where I'm going, even the second time watching it, the first time was definitely the case, where I'm going, did I miss something?
I don't know if either of you guys picked up on this, and maybe, Tom, I was looking at your notes. I don't know if that's the case. Gregory, from the moment the damn movie started, I'm like, this guy is just a creep. The movie does not try to hide it, in my opinion. Like right away, I'm like, he's just kind of lurking at the corners, and it's like, Jesus Christ, Gregory, like leave this lady with a little bit of space. It didn't slow play it to me at all. It was just like front and center. He's the villain. He's the problem. At least that's the way I took it.
There's definitely nothing subtle about his performance. You can tell in kind of the commanding tone that he's always taking with her, and some of the way he kind of just almost by tone alone looks down at her. It feels like he has a power dynamic throughout the entire film. The only times that I think it's even less subtle is when he's breaking, like the letter for Sergis Bauer, or anytime he's got to like adjust on the fly. And you know that he's thinking about stuff in the moment, but it's quite front and center that this guy is doing something. You're just not sure what. I mean, the film does often teeter between this kind of winking knowingness and whether we imagine these whole parts of the story. Does that actually resonate with either of you, the kind of the plot telling device? Because I think one of the things that I really thought about as I was watching the movie, kind of remembering the beats of the story and how it roughly ends, not maybe everything in the middle, was how this story could be potentially updated and redone in a modern telling. And so if you were to do that, I don't know if they would have such a winking nod to the audience as to what's going on all the time. I think they'd try and hold some of those cards and maybe reveal that somewhere in the middle, as opposed to kind of always this knowing facade to the audience. Because as you said, I don't think they're really hiding it all that front and center, that there's something weird going on with him to begin with. But I think you'd have it slow played in a more modern sense. So I guess, does this old timey version of that resonate with you as well? Because I think there are some more modern examples, like a Gone Girl, that kind of does this similarly, that might work a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to me, it's a little clunky, this movie, in terms of like just the mechanics of it. And I think that's just the nature of film was still relatively new in form at the time. And like you said, and this is not me saying that all new films are necessarily better than all old films, because that's not true. But I do feel like we've learned significantly more in storytelling year over year over year, and just like understanding and seeing things from the past that, like you said, nowadays, I think the audiences are smarter to things. And so the directors and the writers have to be more clever in hiding things from you in the subtext. Whereas in 1944, the audiences were just not as used to film as they are now. And so I do think that looking back on it, it's like, oh shit, that was like very obvious and very front and center. But, you know, to an audience in 1944, I don't know if that's the case.
It is a movie that's basically giving you 70 to 80% of the underlying plot. They're keeping certain parts out that will then become more known or obvious with the reveal. And it harkened to me one film in particular, which was notorious for that, and that's Ocean's 11, where they kept parts of how it was going to be done away from you. They hinted at it, and then at the reveal, then they made it clear how all these different parts that they had in there were linked together. And from a point of view of unraveling, the other one that I can think of is different plot method, but that's The Hangover, where they tell you what the ending is, and then you have to try to figure out how this all happened, which again, they only give you parts and you have to piece things together. And that's ultimately what this is about. They're trying to keep you in the dark so that you question whether he's really trying to drive her insane or whether she's really going insane. And I think that makes the payoff at the end so much more enjoyable to the movie watcher.
It's also got elements, and I don't think this is a perfect comparison, but it's certainly one that came to my mind just because it's kind of fresh. It only came out last year. It has sort of Saltburn-y elements to it. You know there's something off in Saltburn the whole time, and then obviously at the end you get the big long reveal of what's going on. But it's very clear that you're supposed to be questioning something throughout the film, and then it kind of hits you with the wham. And it feels like Emerald Fennell, the director of that film, was influenced by stuff like Cukor and others of this time period, Hitchcock and other, again, just those suspense films of this time period feel like they were used in contemporary formats there. And so it was hard for me to not kind of see something in that.
I think that a couple of the examples that have been mentioned, I actually like the Saltburn a little bit more than I do possibly the Ocean's 11 or the Hangover, because I think part of the trick of the Hangover and Ocean's 11 is you don't know you're being tricked. And that's where I think this movie doesn't have quite that same magic to it of rewatchability at times, because you'll go back and try and piece how things fit together, where it's showing you little bits and clues that you don't know are clues at the time. This is much more obvious in its tone of setting it right from the beginning that there's something not right and you don't know what it is. And so while it waits to reveal the other 20%, which I do think is apt, I just don't know if it's quite at the same level. The trick, I would say, or why Saltburn would differ, is that at multiple different stages in that movie, you think it reveals what the actual secret is on several different occasions, like when you see his childhood home and that his family isn't actually dead, that it's, excuse me, I should have, spoiler alert,
I was tiptoeing around things.
because I know at least Dana has not seen it. But anyway, when you see the reveal of that, you think, okay, well, now the mystery's done and we'll just play out the rest of things. And that's not exactly how it goes. So there are many different stages with which how you reveal certain pieces of information. And I think we have gotten more clever at. But this does remind me a lot of other like Hitchcock type movies of the era as well.
Well, the stage play Gaslight was written by the same writer who wrote the stage play Rope, which Hitchcock converted into the movie.
And that feels similar, where the reveal is so early on, it's much more of the suspense of actually finding out whether they're going to be caught.
Yeah, this one doesn't really feel like a Q-core movie fundamentally when I was kind of looking through his filmography a little bit. It makes me kind of, and I know you guys have him as a tier 3 director, which decent placement, by the way. It makes me
I'm glad
wonder,
you agreed with at least one part of the list.
something there, yeah. It makes me wonder what he would have done if he had like stayed in this lane a little more versus, you know, the My Fair Ladies and the Star is Born and that kind of stuff. I feel like he could have been a direct rival to a lot of Hitchcock's work if he had kind of focused on this kind of stuff. I'm not saying what he did was not good, but I would have maybe appreciated him even more as a director if he had gone this course a little bit more.
Yeah, looking through at least the more famous versions of a lot of his films, it seems that they're much more romantic as opposed to thriller or psychological. And so that would have been interesting. I agree that he could have carved out a different lane for himself than he ended up having.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like he's talked about today the way a lot of those directors of that era are personally.
So, Dad, are you ready to give us some more background on this? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. Gaslight is a gripping psychological thriller that delves into the dark depths of manipulation and deception. Set in Victorian London, the film follows the newlywed Paula as she moves into her ancestral home. However, as strange occurrences begin to unfold and Paula's sanity is called into question, the true horror emerges. Her husband's insidious gaslighting tactics to convince her she's losing her mind. In a spellbinding performance, Ingrid Bergman captures Paula's descent into fear and doubt, while Charles Boyer masterfully portrays the sinister husband. With its haunting atmosphere and expertly crafted suspense, Gaslight remains a timeless classic that leaves audiences on the edge of their seats.
Thank you. Did you know? When this movie was produced, MGM attempted to have all prints of the previous version, Gaslight, from 1940, destroyed. These efforts were ultimately unsuccessful, though the movie was rarely seen for the next few decades. Most of the prints for Gaslight from 1940, which survived MGM's attempted eradication, did so because they had been mistakenly labeled Angel Street, the title of the movie's 1938 stage production. Did you know? Director George Cukor suggested that Ingrid Bergman study the patients at a mental hospital to learn about nervous breakdowns. She did, focusing on one woman in particular whose habits and psychological quirks became part of the character. Did you know? The scene in which Dame Angela Lansbury lights a cigarette in contradiction to Ingrid Bergman's wishes had to be postponed until the end of the production. Lansbury was only 17 when filming began, and because she was a minor, she had to be monitored by a social worker who refused to allow Lansbury to smoke, and the scene had to be postponed until her 18th birthday. When Lansbury walked on set on her birthday, Bergman and the crew had organized a party for her, and the cigarette scene was shot immediately after they celebrated her birthday. Cake and cigarettes. What a world.
Very 40s.
Did you know? Director George Cukor asked producers to hire Paul, I'm going to butcher this, but Holdschinsky, to help design the intricate Victorian sets. Holdschinsky was a German refugee who had fled his native country because of the war. He had been well acquainted with upper-class European decor because his family had accumulated wealth through their newspaper business, and his wife was the heiress of a German railroad fortune. Holdschinsky had lost much of his material wealth when he fled to the United States. However, he had retained his eye for period decoration. He was working on rather routine, uncredited set dressings when Cukor tagged him for work on this movie. The producers pushed for a more well-known and established set designer, but Cukor stuck with Holdshinsky. The gamble paid off as Holdshinsky's set designs won an Academy Award. Did you know? Ingrid Bergman found the beginning love scene with Charles Boyer so uncomfortable because the two had just met prior to filming the scene that she refused to do any other such love scene with someone she had just met for the rest of her career. When a similar situation arose with Anthony Perkins while she was filming Goodbye Again from 1961, she asked Perkins to kiss her privately in her dressing room to prepare for the scene, so she would not be embarrassed and flustered when kissing him actually on screen. Did you know? Director George Cukor employed a storytelling method in order to get Ingrid Bergman in the right mindset as filming progressed. Each day, Cukor would recount the entire plot of the movie to Bergman up to the point of the scenes they were set to film that day. Cukor felt the method was necessary because the movie was not shot sequentially, and Bergman's character was supposed to change over time. Bergman quickly grew frustrated with the technique and told Cukor, "I'm not a dumb Swede, you've told me that before." Cukor ceased the storytelling for a few days until a producer notified Cukor of a sharp decline in acting quality in the daily rushes. The producer told Cukor that the actors and actresses appeared to be acting as though they were underwater. So Cukor resumed his storytelling method, a practice Bergman soon grew to appreciate. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 211th episode, we discuss the dawn of New Hollywood with the only Best Picture winner ever to receive an X rating, Midnight Cowboy from 1969, celebrating its 55th anniversary. Directed by John Schlesinger, written by Waldo Salt, music by John Barry, starring John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. All right. We left off at Best Performance. Dad, who do you have down?
I have one Ingrid Bergman. I thought her performance is probably one of the best performances I've seen a actor give, regardless of gender. I mean, her performance was dead on, trying to go between questioning herself and her sanity and having moments of being there and then not there and back and forth. I just thought her performance was excellent.
It's got to be Bergman. I don't think there's much of a question there. I think she's one of the great actresses ever put to film. I mean, on my Revisionist Almanac show, I know we've had many a debate on many an episode. Who's the greatest of all time? Is it Cate Blanchett, Meryl Streep, Katharine Hepburn, yada, yada, yada. I don't think Ingrid Bergman gets mentioned in that conversation enough, and I think that she should. She's got 3 Oscar wins to her name. You could argue any of those 3 is her best performance. I might say Gaslight is probably the peak for her. And even beyond just her performance, the costume design, everything she's wearing in this movie kind of took my breath away every time she was in a scene with the different stuff. She just kind of radiates from the screen. And after 4 watches of this movie, it didn't feel diminished in any way, which is a real testament to her quality and what she brings.
So I had kind of a journey to figuring out who my best performer was. I went through multiple different names. I started off actually thinking I'd go with Charles Boyer, but then the further on you go into this and the more obvious his kind of shtick becomes, it kind of grates a little bit. And so I left him off of my nominations completely. So then I started to go, okay, is it Ingrid Bergman? What is she doing on screen? And I've always said I'm a very terrible judge of what acting quality is. I'm not sure what exactly it is that I'm watching and how to judge whether somebody's actually getting into it or not sometimes. And it's very difficult for me to necessarily say this is a better acting performance than that per se. A lot has to do with, do I like your character? Do I lose myself a little bit into who you're playing? And kind of, do you give somewhat of a charismatic, even as a bad person sometimes, role that I can really kind of enjoy what you're bringing? And every time you're on screen, I kind of enjoy you being there, as opposed to somebody who you kind of notice when they're bad. In this case, I evaluated her, but I ended up with her as my secondary because the stylistic choices that I think are made in the direction of the movie, from being able to put things together from an editing standpoint, the story choices as things kind of carry on, the ability to hold things back, but to kind of maybe question your own reality in what's being portrayed on screen, the framing of certain shots. I thought there were some brilliant shots, not only of the lighting, which were actual gas lights that they had borrowed, one being actually from like a famous chateau or something that was near Menlo Park, I think was originally like one of those that was that old, was used in the production of the movie. But there's another one where she goes into a room and all you see of the two of them arguing is shadows on the door. I thought that was a great shot. It's about midway through the movie. So there's a lot of stylistic choices. And I think from the tone set by the movie, the two most important people to me were Bergman and Cukor. But I figured both of you would go Bergman. So I'm going to go Cukor here just to give a little bit of a gradation on some love. So my best secondary was Bergman. I kind of mirror a lot of what you guys are saying. I think you probably have better depth of judge of acting than I probably do. So I'll leave it at that. But best secondary performances for either of you.
Do you want to go, Andrew?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've got Boyer. I think that he's the king of creepy. Like I said, the movie's not slow playing it. There's nothing subtle about it, in my opinion. But I do think that he sort of ratchets up the intensity of the creepiness and the unhinged nature. And, you know, really when she finds the letter, he sort of has the snap moment and things start kind of spiraling. And I appreciated that he really went kind of off the deep end by the end of it. And I appreciated the sort of full villainous dive he took into the movie. So he's my secondary.
He's my secondary also. And what I really loved about his acting was the moments where he was able to go completely just snap dead anger and then catch himself. And you could see mentally him catching himself. And then, oh, I'm sorry that I was so angry with you, Paula. You have to forgive me because I am concerned about you.
You almost leaned into Bela Lugosi there for a minute.
Well, I tried.
Creepiest way anyone has ever said Paula. Unfortunately, that will always stick in the back of my mind. So, most charismatic, I have Joseph Cotton, and this should come as no surprise to anyone who heard our Third Man episode. I love Joseph Cotton. It is very reminiscent of his character from The Third Man. He's just fun whenever he shows up for me. So I'm glad to have another one of these in the bag.
I have Ingrid Bergman. And the reason is because she's beautiful. She was a great actress. I mean, everybody loved her. And in 1950, when she was doing Stromboli, she fell in love with Roberto Rossellini and got pregnant. Isabella was the result of that. She got kind of ostracized in Hollywood. And so for no other reason than, one, I think she's beautiful. And two, what hypocrisy for Hollywood to ostracize somebody for having an affair and getting pregnant. I mean, oh my gosh. That was like Tuesday on most of the studios. So I'm giving it to her for both her acting, her stage presence, or as well as the fact that she got screwed by double standard.
Okay, so I intentionally let you go before me, Dana, because even though you hate half of my favorite directors apparently from last week's episode, which I'm still taking major grief towards, I agree with you. We're on the same page here, so at least we're lockstep right now. I think Bergman she's just like a charisma machine. I think she just exudes glamour and beauty and elegance, but she can also, as the movie reveals itself, and as we get to the later confrontation, I think she can sort of dial it up herself and sort of play crazy a little bit, like she's playing Boyer at the end there. So I just really love what she does, and I think, Dana, you're right on point that I think it's one of those great all-time performances for me.
Oh no. So we have another guest that's just going to go in lockstep with you all of a sudden? I mean,
apparently.
Kieran messages me almost once a week. You know, I really agreed with Dana more often, and I just find myself constantly agreeing with him more often than you.
Here's my angry notes page if you need me to attack Dana at all.
That's fine. And quite frankly, I'm used to it. When you put yourself in the arena, you subject yourself to attack.
Something tells me when we get over to my show and start talking about Oscar winners and stuff, Dana and I might not be eye to eye on everything. We'll find out soon enough.
I'm sure we will not.
All right, let's move to best scene then. This was a really difficult category to try and come up with 5. I usually try and give like a full 5 to round it out at least and then leave some space. But I think this movie works much better as a whole than it does individual moments. And so I tried my best. You guys can vary if you want, but first scene I have is back at number 9, which is when they first come to the house and you kind of get this comment of it smells like death in here, but they're kind of taking off the covers of stuff. You see kind of the first real set of the layout of the house, gives you a few things like the glove as eventual calling cards back later on in the movie. Then I have at the tower, so their day at the Tower of London, seeing the jewels, getting our first real glimpse of Joseph Cotton and his introduction. I just think that's more important to the movie overall, and so I couldn't necessarily leave that out. I have at the Dalroys, so that's the piano concert that they go to that she insists on going to, and then she has the mental breakdown during. I have Cameron visiting Paula, and then for a while I almost had these two as similar things, but the final confrontation I pulled out individually because I think that kind of deserves its own place or its own thing outside of Cameron finally coming into the house and kind of revealing she's not actually crazy. So I'll separate those two out, but those are my 5. Did you guys have any ones that you wanted to add?
I did.
Yeah, I've got one. I just thought the opening set the tone really well. It wasn't like
the hazy cold open?
Yeah. I just think it hit the right tone immediately to where I'm like, okay, I understand. It almost felt kind of Sherlock Holmesy in a way, where it sort of set the mystery element right out of the gate. So I appreciated the way it set it up.
I have the painting and the missing items because I think at that point in time it became obvious to the viewer that he was manipulating her, and watching her have an absolute meltdown when he's calling the maids in to say whether they took the painting down or not, and it becomes obvious, and that's where he is at his ultimate level of evilness. So I had that as a separate one.
Okay. So adding those two in, so we have 7 choices. What do you think is the best scene?
The reason I fought for the painting missing items piece is because I think that's the best, because I think that shows Boyer's ultimate evil, and it shows absolutely Bergman falling apart, where she could not handle it anymore, and that any belief that she was maintaining her sanity was now in question. She was doubting herself from that point on.
Damn it, Dana. We're going to, you and I are just together today, apparently. That is, for me, the scene of the movie where it really turns. And Tom, to your point, it was kind of hard for me to extract certain scenes. And I think that's the reason why I watched it 4 times in a week, is because I was like trying to really do my best to segment this thing. But it does work in this unique way where it doesn't feel, it feels like it's one overall larger body of a movie as opposed to a bunch of these things. You know, it doesn't really feel broken up in the way a lot of them do, and I appreciated that about the movie. But if I had to pinpoint it, it was Gregory when he's playing the piano and telling her they're going to go out at night, and then she thinks she forgot and all that. But then that immediately goes into the scene that Dana's talking about with the missing painting, and that's the moment for me where the movie kind of like really sinks its hooks into you.
For the sake of being different, and I think you both make great points on that scene, I'm just going to go with Cameron visiting Paula and kind of where we get to see the tapestry unravel. We've built up to this moment. We've got so much tension involved in this. Cotton's character is taking so much interest in the case, but you don't know what he's actually got. And the ability to come in and start to decipher where all of these clues have led you, I think is always the linchpin of any mystery movie. And if that scene doesn't work, it makes the rest of it kind of regrettable. And so because of its importance specifically, you have to get that right. And it didn't strike a tone as, oh, well, we're just going to shotgun the rest of the plot at you. it was kind of even slowly revealed through the course of the rest of this. The glove comes out. She starts to trust him. Oh, you also notice the gaslight is actually getting lower. That I haven't actually been going crazy. What's been going on? Where is he? So I think some of the staging and the rest of it, it has so many different elements to what's going on, and as it's slowly revealed through the course of it, and I think part of that has to do with the writing, but I do think it becomes an outsized importance to the rest of the movie, because if you just say, well, this guy is this guy, and so he's been sneaking in and he's been trying to find these jewels, so let's go find him, it doesn't really work. So I think you have to slowly give that out. So just for its patience, I'll go with that one. Favorite scene and most indelible, though, are the same scene for me. I think the rest of the movie works really well, and as a psychological thriller, it's invested, but because of such almost PTSD level difficulty watching some of those scenes, and particularly the one you both mentioned, I just have so much trouble with the rest of the movie that until we start to get a little sense of relief, do I kind of say, oh, good, now I can kind of invest again in this movie. Because of that, it's my favorite scene and my most indelible, that you have Cotton finally coming in and kind of connecting the dots for everything, and you get the resolution of the movie. So favorite scene for either of you?
Favorite scene is the same for me, which is the missing painting scene.
For me, the favorite scene is the tower, simply because it kind of shows the first manipulation. It shows Cotton's entry into the film and how he's going to be the ultimate protagonist in this, and unravel the mystery. And then Boyer's flash forward, where he has almost a sexual experience looking at the crown jewels. It foreshadows what the result is going to be.
Most indelible?
For me, the most indelible moment is the final confrontation, at least in the moment when Boyer's tied to the chair and she's sort of like turning the tables, if you will, because the whole film is about Ingrid Bergman being front and center, winning Best Actress. If that's her when they're at the Oscars and they show the clip or whatever, I feel like that'd be the clip they'd show to like say, hey, this is her moment. And so for me, I feel like if I was going to show this to somebody, I'd show them that scene and be like, hey, this is one of those all-time great actresses, and this is her doing her thing. So for me, that's the indelible moment is when she kind of takes control and is in charge of the situation for the first time.
Well, I have the same. This is a scene that is probably 60 years in advance. This is the ultimate scene where a woman who's been abused, neglected, and mistreated has the ultimate revenge and is able to lord over her tormentor. It would take another 60 years before this level of triumph would be granted to a woman in a film like this.
So with that, we will take our second break and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our master greatest movies of all time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnyDuncanStudios.com/Gmode podcast and find it as the top entry on the greatest movie of all time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 192 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Also, you can follow each individual episode on our website as well. That has the notes for every individual episode with all of our scores, category nominations, and the individual factoids for each episode of this show. Just click the link in the episode description or go to RonnyDuncanStudios.com/Gmode podcast to find that. All right. It is time for everyone's favorite Ask Dana Anything. First question up, submitted by...
Did you save a juicy one for me, I hope?
I have a couple that were submitted by some random dude in St. Louis. First one up, and we'll make this slightly obnoxious. How much can you bench?
Boy, I haven't benched in a long time, but for a while there, I was probably about 220, but probably 180 now if I had to, just because I haven't done it in a while.
Now, I know that you had a question, Arnold or Sly, last week, so this is somewhat in that same vein. Steven Seagal or Jean-Claude Van Damme?
Which one makes me want to barf more? Is that the question?
I don't know. You'd have to ask our listener from St. Louis.
I mean, if that's my choice, I punt.
To be fair to that listener who asked the question, he was in the middle of watching 101 movies and had watched 2 Van Damme movies and a Seagal movie in a day and was losing his mind a little bit, I believe.
I guess if I had to pick, with a gun to my head, I'm going to go Van Damme because his performances are much more forgettable.
Well, I was just going to go Van Damme
because
he's not as reprehensible of an individual character as Seagal.
Oh, yeah. Seagal is just an ass, and his acting is so bad. I mean, you remember how bad it is. He just kind of blends into the woodwork, and you just go, ugh, and that's enough. I mean, it's kind of like that when you have that ingredient that's added to a soup that kind of makes it funky tasting as opposed to something that's like inedible.
It's a good comparison.
If our listener from St. Louis would like to please stand up.
Not me.
Oh, it wasn't you. With that flurry of like 12 questions right in a row.
You caught me at the right moment, I think.
Yeah, probably. But we are now exhausted on all of our Ask Dana Anything questions. So that means it is the responsibility of the audience. If you want more of this segment, you have to submit new questions. So that is greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can communicate with us via our website, RonnyDuncanStudios.com/Gmote podcast, or you can find us at any of our socials on YouTube, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @Gmote podcast. You can submit any questions via any of those places, even sneak them into our DMs. That's acceptable. I'll take any of those. But we want to know if this is a segment worth keeping or not for the general audience.
Be careful if you DM Gmote. You never know which Scooby-Doo villain might be hiding behind the answer.
I'm sure it'll get to the right place one way or the other. So, all right. With that, Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
We do. Susan Buckner, 72, American actress, was in Grease, Deadly Blessing, the classic Police Academy 6, City Under Siege. Ian Gelder, 74, British actor, Game of Thrones, Torchwood, and Little Dorrit. Jeannie Epper, 83, American stuntwoman, Romancing the Stone, Kill Bill, Volume 2, Minority Report, Wonder Woman, the TV series.
Before you continue, I just want to know if there's like a specific serial killer or disease that happened to all of the people of Romancing the Stone. Because I swear to God, that's like the second person within like 2 weeks of each other that worked on that movie that has passed away. And I think that's the third one for this calendar year. So you got a really odd calling card if you're a serial killer of people from Romancing the Stone and somehow left Michael Douglas alone. But okay.
Well, and Danny DeVito and Kathleen Turner.
Please don't touch DeVito. Leave him alone.
Even if he is doing sub-commercials. Dwayne Eddy, 86, American Hall of Fame guitarist. Rebel Rouser, Because They're Young, and the theme to Peter Gunn. Brian McCarty, 59, Scottish actor. Rob Roy, The Ghost and the Darkness, and Speed 2, Cruise Control.
The superior of the Speed movies. And no, I'm not serious, Joey.
Jan Haig, 90, American filmmaker, artist, and writer, founded the AFI's Directing Workshop for Women. Bernard Hill, 79, English actor, Lord of the Rings, Titanic, and Boys from the Black Stuff.
So for anyone that remembers the Lord of the Rings movies or watches them semi-annually like I do, he is Theoden, King of Rohan. And I guess he was also the ship captain on the Titanic.
Yep, Captain Smith.
So we remember these fondly for their contributions with a moment of silence here in their honor. Thank you. Let's make the terrible transition to best funniest lines, of which I don't think there are many funniest lines, so it may just be best this week. I don't have a ton. For a movie that is developed from a stage play, there just weren't a lot of great dialogue lines that I really felt needed to be included here, but I'll start with Paula. Isn't it here? You must have dreamed you put it there. Are you suggesting that this is a knife I hold in my hand? Have you gone mad, my husband? Or is it I who am mad?
Paula, if I were not mad, I could have helped you. Whatever you have done, I could have pitied and protected you. But because I am mad, I hate you. Because I am mad, have betrayed you. Because I am mad, I am rejoicing in my heart without a shred of pity, without a shred of regret, watching you go with glory in my heart.
I will pull a funniest line. There was one funny line for me in the whole damn movie, and that's Miss Thwaites on the train when she says, "Have a biscuit, dear," and Paula says, "Thank you," to which Miss Thwaites replies, "Digestive biscuits. Unpleasant name, isn't it? I call them Diggy biscuits." What the hell is a Diggy biscuit? As someone who loves English Premier League and soccer and all of that, I have a lot of friends over in England. Call them cookies. Digestive biscuits sounds stupid. Please call them cookies going forward.
Gregory, I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were dangerous to me. Cameron, I knew from the first moment I saw you that you were dangerous to her.
This is Thwaites. Odd, definitely odd. It's an old household, too. That maidservant, most impertinent. I cannot get a thing out of her. She won't talk to me, though she would quick enough if I wore trousers. The way she carries on with that policeman on the beat, it's scandalous.
Tom, you took all of my good ones. This movie was shockingly low on good lines.
Okay. I have one more. Paula, this night will be a long night. Cameron, but it will end. It's starting to clear. In the morning, when the sun rises, sometimes it's hard to believe there was ever a night. You'll find that too. Reminiscent of one of my favorite all-time movies, The Dark Knight. Do you have any left, Dad?
I do not.
All right. Let's move to the Stanley rubric, our guest's first time through, so we usually don't subject you to going first in this category. Legacy is up first. Dad, do you want to go first or second?
I'll go first. From a legacy, I wondered how much legacy this really had in the industry. But then I stopped to think about how a lot of the industry and a lot of critics still rank this as one of the best performances by an actor of all time, not to mention actress, for the time, which was not nearly as honored, I think, as unfortunately. So I went with a 3.5 because I think that there's still a lot of critics who really love this film and the portrayal of it by Bergman specifically. For the public, I was originally going to go with like a 1.5 because I'm like, who's watched this film? You know, in our office, only a few people had ever seen it. But here's where the real key comes in. This is now a psychological term. The term gaslight was Merriam-Webster's word of the year for 2005, I believe.
No, it was much later than that. We're talking like in the last 8 years.
Okay. So it's gotten huge. In fact, people who know what the term gaslight means is phenomenal. They don't always know where it comes from, but its impact on current society and culture is pretty significant. So I gave it a point higher than I originally thought of giving it. So for the public, I'm going to go with a 3 just by the term gaslight and the connotations it has. So I'm at a 6.5 for legacy.
I think you could undercut some of that given that this is the third version of Gaslight. But given that it's also the most popular version, I'm going to undercut the undercut by saying you're not going to get the term without this movie and this performance specifically. Now, with all of that being said, I don't think it's held as one of the great acting performances of all time. I think that it doesn't often make the cuts of things. I think this is often forgotten about. I'd be tempted for both the audience and overall for the industry as well to kind of go like a 2 and a 2, but I'll give it an extra half step up because while the term is in the general societal vernacular, the association with the film at large, it's not like with certain lines from other movies, such as, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, or may the force be with you. People have associations with certain things from that. But just having it be part of the name, how many people have an association that it's anything other than having to do with Donald Trump? And Donald Trump has nothing to do with Ingrid Bergman, thank God. I will go in a 2.5 and a 2.5 because of the slight step up. I'm going to go a 5.
The more this episode goes on, I'm starting to get concerned that I'm going to turn into Dana Duncan in 30 years because he basically just said literally everything I was going to say. I'm flabbergasted that Dana and I are having such a fun time together tonight. I got the industry at a 3.5 and I've got the public at a 3, a 6.5 in total. I don't want to be redundant and waste a listener's time. Everything that Dana said is effectively what I had written down. It's like shockingly identical. So, Dana, kudos to you. You've taken the words right out of my mouth.
Well, thank you.
So that's a 6 average between the three of us. Impact and significance. Now, for as much as I dismiss some of the legacy long term, I think in the initial 5 years in which this movie can be judged, it had a high number of Oscars. It was one of the more important films of that particular year. I would say only third to Double Indemnity and Going My Way, which obviously had more Oscar significance beyond that. But I would say Double Indemnity probably takes the cake as the all-time classic out of these three. But of those three, the one that actually won Best Picture is probably the least of those, which is kind of an unusual stroke of luck. But this was also a fairly well-attended, well-producing, got decent reviews at the time movie. And so I'm going to go a 4.5 and a 4.5. I have a 9.
Do you want me to go next?
Go for it, Dana.
All
Let's
right.
see if we align again. It's shocking.
I went with the industry of a 4.5 because it did not win all the Academy Awards that it was nominated for. I couldn't give it a 5. But I gave it a 4.5 because I think the fact that it was nominated all across the board of the top categories says that this was a highly respected film in the industry. For the public, I went with a 4. And the only reason I gave it a little less than that is because I think it was a fairly well watched movie, but I don't get the feeling from some of the things I watched or read that it was held in high esteem by the public per se. It was a period where there were multiple films and there was a list of them. I think one critic who wrote said it was a period of time in Hollywood where they were churning out films on a regular basis that should have been titled or subtitled "Don't Trust Your Husband," because it was Notorious, it was Suspicion from Hitchcock, and a bunch of those films. Double Indemnity again.
That's not the husband so much.
I know, but it's still the same kind of underlying principle, which is
Don't get married.
so. I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle among the public, so I went with a 4 on that for a 8.5 overall.
I'm going to be a little bit harsher than either of you, not significantly, but a little bit. For the public, I share a lot of your sentiments, Dana. I'm just a little bit softer on my score. I've got the public at a 3.5. I think that it did get lost in the shuffle a bit. With the industry, I got it at a 4 because I think the main reason why it made a dent for me in the industry is it helped continue the Ingrid Bergman career trajectory. She obviously won the Academy Award for this, and then she went on in the next couple of years to do Spellbound, Notorious, Journey to Italy, just kind of kept cranking out great movies over the next few years. So I think the impact on the industry for her career alone warrants it a 4 on the industry side. So I've got it at a 7.5 total.
So that's an 8.33 average between the three of us. Novelty. Let's let our guest lead this one off.
I'm going to give it a score of 6.5. And I think that there is some novelty to the general idea of the woman being the lead protagonist in a film this early in Hollywood. I think is a novel concept that kind of stands out from a lot of the other movies that I remember seeing from the early 1940s. But I don't think it was so novel or like in general. I think the movie follows certain beats that a lot of other movies kind of quickly after do better. So for me, I had to be kind of harsh on the score there, and I think a 6.5 is fair, a little harsh maybe, but ultimately I think the movie has some novelty element, but not enough for me to give it up an overwhelmingly great score.
First of all, I could not think of a film that was a psychological thriller per se that was done or as much as this one before.
Oh, I can. How about Rebecca?
Yes and no. I mean, it really isn't a psychological thriller as much as it's just a hidden secret, more or less.
I just vehemently disagree, but okay.
Oh, you're vehemently disagreeing instead of just
Yes, I
disagreeing.
strenuously object.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. You keep that in your back pocket for the future.
Okay.
But as again, I point out, it was so far in advance because the woman lords over her abusive husband and takes revenge, if not, it's at least verbally, but takes revenge on him and plays him out, in retribution. So I give it kudos for that alone, not to mention the fact that I think it's more of a psychological thriller in the fact that it was creating a whole atmosphere of paranoia before psychology was really that prevalent. And psychoanalysis and mental illness was even on the radar. So I'm giving it a 9.
Well, you'll definitely be the odd person out, and I hate to be the mass detractor, but none of those points bear, other than maybe the psychology angle of it, bear a lot of fruit with me. But the problem is that it's not presented in a psychological level in the way that this is performed. I think that's work done after the fact by psychologists after it became much more of a field of science, as opposed to what it was at the time, which was not terribly well explored. The problem I have, and I know that I mentioned it a few times now, I've been experimenting with novelty being split, much like several of our other categories, into two parts: originality and how well it's executed. I don't think this is a terribly original film. One, it's based on another film and on a stage play, so it has other things that it can lean on. Two, I think that the notion that there were not many female protagonists is just generally false. We had so many other thriller types with women in the lead roles. Joan Fontaine did a couple before this movie came out. Obviously, with Rebecca, and I think, is she in Suspicion as well? Either way, Bette Davis had done a couple of these types of roles. Notably, I think Jezebel comes to mind. So the notion that this is not a thing, or that we don't have strong female protagonists, it rings false to me, given the fact that two of the most celebrated movies, not even 5 years before this, are The Wizard of Oz, where we get a fairly strong female protagonist that's obviously legendary, and we get another one in Scarlett O'Hara, which we just discussed not like 15 episodes ago. So it just doesn't necessarily ring out to me. Now, I'm not going to bash this movie. I just don't think it's as original as maybe you're making it out to be. So I had a 2 on that side. But where I think the movie excels is in its execution. I think Q-Core's style, what he brings to it to take it from a stage play to something that's much more visually stunning, that instead of being two-dimensional as a lot of stage-adapted movies can become, he makes it lived in. He makes the environment and the production and the rest of it all lived in. Bergman gives a great performance, obviously, and we have so many other things that are factoring into this that I went a 4 on the execution level. It's not the best executed movie because, unfortunately, I am comparing it against all of moviedom of time, but I will say that it's a fairly high-level executed movie. I could possibly be convinced to go up to maybe a 4.5 on that, but right now I'm sitting at a 6. So that should give us a 7.17 average between the three of us. Classicness, Dad, I let you lead this category.
Well, generally we start at a 7 on classicness and go up or down. I did not, as I continually say, and whether you agree or disagree, the scene where she lords it over him, to me, is way ahead of its time. I don't find anything detracting from the classicness of this. So I went with an 8.5 overall.
I'm pretty close on that, Dana. I've got an 8. I think that the movie surprisingly has aged really well due to just the nature of the gaslighting term and everything in sort of a post Me Too movement. I think a lot of stuff still rings really true, and I think just the sheer acting quality of Bergman and Boyer, as well as Tom, kind of what you said in the previous category. I think that the production design is fantastic. The costume design is fantastic. Everything about the movie looks great still. So I felt an 8 is a really good score for me. When I know people have taken issue with what I give movies as a score. For me, an 8 is a great score. So I'm very happy to give this movie an 8 for classicness.
Yeah, somehow a 7.8 is also a great score, and I'll never understand that one because that's just like a C for me. But okay. All right. To each their own. This category went on a journey with me. I think it has an element of timelessness. There are parts of it that I think have aged particularly well. The psychological predation, for one, I gave it an extra point up for that. So I currently, as it sits, starting with the 7 and then kind of working my way up. Timelessness, I have it at a plus 2 points. I have the psychological predation as an extra. But when I said earlier in our discussion that I kept thinking forward as to how you'd adapt this movie now, there are so many ways that Gregory is able to dominate Paula that don't feel currently accurate to the moment. Not to mention just a lot of the informalities of a male-dominated situation. Like, how could he necessarily shut her up in the house without having anybody ever allowed to visit her? It just doesn't ring true to how we would normally think of things in a modern sense. And if you kind of dismiss it, it's a period piece, quote unquote, and that there are some old customs that are there. I just don't know how many people are willing to follow you with that, not knowing that those would be customs. You'd have to do a lot of explaining for some of those, the way that he's able to handle himself, dominate her in not only a physical stature, a tone of voice, but also in the custom and tradition of that time period that I just don't think age as well. So I pegged it back a little bit, and I have also an 8.
I will just say you're looking this as a more educated white male. And if you had to deal with some of the various classes and socioeconomic levels that I have through my life, you'll understand that there are still dynamics where men are part of their abuse is their manipulation of women who grew up in abusive households with abusive fathers. And so I do not find that it aged that poorly. I still see it.
That's right. Dana, champion of the everyman. While you still see it, it doesn't mean it's acceptable. And that's what I'm picking on. There are things, or there are obvious things that we keep seeing regularly that are accepted somewhat, but then we've kind of flipped a page on whether some of that is acceptable or not. And I think the majority of people who are going to watch this movie are not going to accept that behavior generally, or the way he's able to use his positions of power as somehow the head of the household, even though it's all of her money, it's her ancestral home, to be able to dominate her in such a way. It's maybe a smaller thing, but to me, it stuck out.
Okay.
Rewatchability, applying our Kieran test, I have a 2 that I would likely turn it on again. I certainly would not be watching it 4 times in 1 week. And the likelihood that if I were to turn this on, that I would likely finish it, it depends on which spot in the movie that it would start. I think the further on into the movie that you might turn it on or see it on, like a Turner Classic Movies or something, the more likely I am to probably finish it. So I'm going to go with a 3 on that level. I have a 5 overall.
I am higher than you for sure. 4 times
The man
in a
who
week.
watched it 4 times in a week?
Yeah. You know what, though? I'd watch it a 5th time. I didn't find it to be cumbersome or tiring. I thought the runtime was efficient and lean. I thought that there was tremendous quality to the film. It was directed well. I have nothing to knock it on. I gave it a 7.5. I have so many goddamn movies in my life that I have to watch every day. So this is not going to be one I like fast track watching again because of the nature of what I have to do. But if I saw it on TV, probably on a TCM or something, some night flipping channels, it would definitely be one I would want to turn on because I enjoy the acting a lot and I enjoyed the experience a lot through this research. So I have it at a 7.5, which is much higher than I thought I would going into this.
Well, for me, I mean, I'm not unless it's a comedy, I'm not one to turn on a film in the middle and watch it. It has to be like one of my 2 or 3 or 4 top films for me to do that. I either watch it from the beginning or I don't watch it. Unless, of course, it's a comedy. I mean, I can turn on Airplane or Caddyshack or Blazing Saddles any point in the film and continue to watch it because I sometimes feel a need to laugh because of the seriousness of my life.
So Shawshank is one of your 3 or 4 favorites because you said for years you had never seen the first 20 minutes of it. You just kept
Correct.
catching it on cable.
I think that's about right.
That's all of us, though.
Okay. I've never heard you express that is like one of your
It's
top
probably
3 or
within
4.
the top 5 as far as rewatching films for that very reason.
Okay. Just want to hold you consistent.
Okay. I have a 7.5.
There's too much bromancing on this program. I'm just...
I spent all
that's
day.
what happens. You're just the odd man out, Tom. And I say that emphasizing the word odd.
I think Tom was provoking me to get mad at Dana, and here we are, both tired of Tom. How the tables have turned.
It's not shocking. That's been the story of my life. Somehow my father turns into the mascot of the program and is much more liked by the general population. And I, of course, have to wear the red A as the outcast at all times. It's just the way things go. I know I'm always the second choice.
At least you didn't cut Paul Thomas Anderson or Brian De Palma, just to name a couple. I still have some bones to pick with Dana over there.
That's
you will
fine.
get your opportunity, but all right. To incorporate our audience score here, we had an 84% for Google users and a 90% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.7. So to repeat the categories, we had a 6 for legacy, an 8.33 for impact and significance, a 7.17 for novelty, an 8.17 for classicness, and a 6.67 for rewatchability, with an 8.7 for audience score, giving us a final total of 45.04, which I think that's the first time we've ever had something end in a 04.
Hey, look at us.
Setting new marks every day. And that would currently place it on our list at number 115 between Back to the Future and Slumdog Millionaire.
Damn. I'd rather watch Back to the Future. I'll just say that.
Yeah, well, I think most people would. It's a much more fun movie, but unfortunately, my co-host is not a particular fan of said movie.
I wouldn't go there.
I would, and you have. There's multiple hours of recorded things out in the ether saying that you don't like that movie. You were so offended when it was number 1 on our list for a while.
Well, okay, it's not the greatest movie of all time. That's what offended me. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it.
Apparently you're offended anytime there's a number 1 movie that isn't Casablanca.
No.
Okay, sure. But if you disagree with any of our scores, you can certainly write us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on any of our socials at YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMotePodcast. And there is a chance that you might actually converse with me instead of our Scooby-Doo villain. So with that, we'll head over to remaining questions. Could this be remade in a modern setting, and how?
Yes, it could. I'm a little surprised that it hasn't been when you think about the recycled nature of Hollywood, and like this is sort of prime, it's there for the pickings with the culture and the climate and everything. So, I had already mentioned Emerald Fennell earlier, and I think she's got a lot of interesting points of view from a directorial standpoint with Promising Young Woman and Saltburn. I think she'd be an interesting choice if I'm just pulling a name out of a hat. I think this needs, if it were to be made in a modern setting, I think you need a female voice behind the camera and maybe, putting pen to paper to tell it the way it needs to be nowadays. And I would be intrigued to see what some of the really talented young female directors nowadays could do with it.
I agree with you there. I, number one, think this could easily be remade. Not necessarily a like for like. Like, I wouldn't put it in a Victorian setting. I would put it in a
Right.
modern setting. And I think there are a lot of tricks of the trade that you could do. And I would have thrown out another name up until the point where you said it had to be a woman. And I'm like, yeah, damn it, he's right. I would have thrown out Jordan Peele as well, but okay. I also think you could switch the perspective. You could have the woman be the antagonist, but maybe that's a little too forward thinking.
It would be interesting to do it that way. It would completely flip the power dynamic.
You could also have a power dynamic be some racial tensions. So I think there are many angles that you could take to try and redo something like this. But the bones of it, I think, where there's a mystery and you don't know who you're potentially marrying, you get in this whirlwind type of a relationship, and all of a sudden he kind of starts to flip a little bit. And it could almost be done as much more of a horror film. And I think that would be the angle to do it right now to make it more popular than to just do a straight up thriller, because those haven't been as productive box office wise. But if you get it in the right person's hands, like if this is an A24 or maybe a Blumhouse type of situation, I think that could actually do really well.
Yeah, another director that comes to mind that I just think she's doing some really interesting things right now is Rose Glass, who's got a film out this year called Love Lies Bleeding, and she previously did a film called Saint Maud, which is more of a horror film, and I think she would be another, really talented young female director that has the chops to take on something with a lot of this. There's a lot of meat on the bone for this movie that you could apply to a modern setting. So I think there are plenty of options out there that they could go with if they wanted to do it.
Certainly. Although Fennell is a great suggestion, as I've loved both of her movies. Number 2, I had, did Elizabeth and Nancy really not notice the strange things going on about the house, or were they just ordered to remain silent? It's my number one thing that I can't figure out, because you would think anyone else would notice that the lights are dimming, but then to not like acknowledge that she's not going crazy. Is it something they were ordered not to do, or is it something where they just simply didn't notice? And I would have a hard time thinking they didn't notice.
It's a good question. It didn't even really come to mind when I was watching it. If I'm presented with the two options of did they not notice it or were they ordered to remain silent, I guess it'd be the latter. Is
there a third option?
I don't know. I mean, maybe plot hole. Like, is it as simple as a plot hole?
No, the cook is going to be primarily on the first floor and in the kitchen area. So anything that's happening upstairs, she's not going to be involved.
Except there's a specific scene where she's in the room with Ingrid Bergman when that happens.
Well, I don't know, but Boyer flirting with Jessica Fletcher.
But she wasn't the one I'm talking about. It's more Elizabeth, who seems to have an affinity for her or for Paula, and seems to be protective of her, especially by the end of the movie. Like, does she really not notice?
Well, but the gaslight itself isn't really, it's only part of it. I mean, in and of itself, seeing that flicker is not necessarily, unless she's discussing the fact that she thinks that she's imagining it. It's all the rest of the stuff.
Except that when we get the final resolution and she realizes she isn't actually going crazy is when Joseph Cotton, with his back turned to the light, points out immediately, yes, I notice it too. So it's either a plot hole or it's one of those other two options. I think those are the only three things. And it's the most ambiguous part of this movie that just bugs me.
Just that?
Well, there are many things that bug me, like you. But this is beside the point.
I think when you look at movies from this era, in terms of like a plot hole or whatever, they were clearly not made. Again, it's relatively early in the history of cinema, and they're just not. Audiences aren't conditioned at this time in Hollywood, to be like micro psychoanalyzing all of these things the way we do now. They weren't anticipating people doing 2-hour podcasts and breaking things down, 60 years later. It was just looser. It was not like when they were writing screenplays, they weren't concerned with every I being dotted and T being crossed or whatever. So when I tend to watch films from this era, I'm impressed when a movie doesn't have a bunch of plot holes like that. That's a mark in its favor, but I tried to just kind of not stress myself out with that because I understand the nature of, again, nowadays, if you have one little plot hole, Twitter's going to blow you up about it. Whereas in the 40s, audiences were not going to the theater to micro obsess over this stuff.
No, they were busy worrying about whether their son or daughter or husband or nephew were being killed in the Pacific or the Atlantic. And
Right.
this was a certain element of escapism.
Mm-hmm.
Remaining questions for either of you?
I don't.
My only question is, and this is just like a theoretical, what do we think the punishment was for Gregory? And if he got out of jail, would he inevitably do this same thing again?
Well, he was hung because execution was the ultimate punishment for murder, because he did murder.
Yeah, I think he's convicted of at least the one murder.
And the hanging was the punishment that was prescribed under British law at that time. So he would have been hung.
But to take your hypothetical to the full extent that you would like, I do think that he is a dog with a bone and will come back around for this again. But his entrance point is obviously lesser. And given that the jewels are recovered, I don't know what happens to those necessarily, but you would think that she just kind of inherits the money. So his ability to try and come back for the jewels is probably significantly, if not almost outright impossible, significantly lessened.
Yeah, I don't see him like going to jail and just rolling over easily. He doesn't strike me as that type of individual.
All right. Final thoughts for the week. Let's start with our guest.
Oh, start with me. Okay. Wasn't prepared for that.
Really? You held up an entire half page saying that you were prepared.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if I was going to front load this.
This
or
is
back
open space for any thoughts that you may have on anywhere we have wronged you.
Well, now I feel bad because Dana and I have just had a love fest for a couple hours, and now I have some expletives written on this page that I don't feel like it's worth telling him at this point. Let me say this. So I love the work that you guys do in general on the show, and I think that you have tremendous insight as film enthusiasts. And having said that, with all due respect, the director pantheon, you guys are out of your goddamn minds.
Okay.
I'll address Dana first. Okay. Starting with John Hughes right out of the gate, that is just like a brutal nail right in my heart. I can't believe you were so cruel to John Hughes. He's a tremendous director, writer, etc.
Oh, here we go.
Okay. Putting John Hughes aside, I'm not here to defend John Hughes.
We're not putting John Hughes completely aside, because there will be a point in time where I have told him he can take breaks from the episode when he just doesn't want to cover Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles or Breakfast Club, all these movies that he's like, these are all the people I hated in high school. Why would I want to watch a movie and spend 2 more hours with them?
But I mean, like Planes, Trains, Automobiles, and he wrote Home Alone. He's a machine of, and I know he didn't direct Home Alone, obviously, but
I don't understand how he hated Ferris Bueller. Like, I had to pull the Ferris Bueller episode because it was so against type, given that this is supposed to either be celebrating movies, and I love the movie. I know a lot of other people love the movie, but when we first recorded it, he was so negative about the whole thing that I re-recorded it with somebody else.
the John Hughes one makes more sense in context, obviously, but that being the first name on the list, I was like, oh god, we're in for a rough one here. And then I'll point out a few. Ang Lee, we'll talk Ang Lee Tom and I here in about a week.
Yeah.
Brian De Palma, Denis Villeneuve, Bong Joon-ho, Paul Thomas Anderson. Just you were just like throwing body punches at me left and right. All these directors I love. I could not believe what was happening.
So Bong Joon-ho has to do, again, with the amount of films that I've seen of his. I've only seen Parasite. So to put him among the pantheon when you've seen one film, and no matter how good it is, it's not going to have the depth or the quality of some of the other ones that we had on there.
But yet you let Wong Kar-wai get through. What is happening here?
I didn't let anything get through. I would have much rather had Brian De Palma and John Hughes, but somebody was just trying to play the chaos artist.
And the most chaotic part of the artist was his using a veto on Otto Preminger. What the hell are we doing, Dana? You had all these great names, and you save Otto Preminger just so you can put him in tier 4. Come on now.
Yes, there's the part that got me. He saves him only so that he can put him one tier in, just like a half step. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, your exclusions really, really affected me that morning that I was listening. And Dana, Tom, over to you. I appreciated a lot of your exclusions. Woody Allen, yay, he stinks. But
we will discuss him next week. Yes,
we need to educate you on some world cinema, my friend, because Tarkovsky, Chan-wook, Truffaut, Bergman, Fellini, Iñárritu. What are you doing, man? You left off all these great foreign directors. We gotta school you a little bit.
I've seen a few Iñárritu films, and I just don't think there's anything special to any of the ones I've seen.
Oh man. Well, hopefully we'll get you to see some more. But and then Wes Craven making the top 50, just erroneous behavior. I mean, yeah, crazy. And then to top it all off. You guys, we got past the draft. I was feeling good. The tiers started making sense. And then we get to tier 1. You put Marty Scorsese in there deservedly, and you hit him with The Departed as the defining film. And just, that was the knockout blow once and for all, Dana. My goodness.
Well.
But all in all, Tom, I know behind the scenes you were a little worried about how that one might turn out. Hands down, one of the best episodes of GMO. Loved it. Can't wait till you guys do a Redux version of it down the road in a few years.
Well, I haven't proposed the idea quite yet. You messaged me that we had to do it, and I feel that since we have 2 open weeks in September, there are a couple of options to fill it. But doing a genre-specific pantheon, like a sports movie pantheon, and I will have my criteria ready for that.
Hey.
Might be a very good idea.
I would love to hear you guys do a sports movie pantheon, and
I think we may shrink the pantheon though to 3 tiers for something
that's a good idea.
Specific. But directors, there were so many that having a full top 50 made a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I know behind the scenes you had asked some of us to give you some names, and I mean, narrowing it down to 104 was hard. There's a lot of great directors out there, and it wasn't an easy task to get to 50, but some of the 50 were a little bit questionable. A little bit. Peter Weir on the list, top tier 4. I don't know about that.
Yeah, but some of the qualities of some of the movies that he has done and his overall depth, I don't have as much of a problem with that one. Personally, I had Villeneuve in my top tiers, but I know Dana hasn't really seen any of his movies, except for I think he saw Dune. But I would have him in there. I stated on the episode, I think Arrival may be the best science fiction film of the last 20 years.
I know one thing for sure. For anyone who listened and heard all the tier lists, I know if I had to pick a tier that I want to go and hang out and have a beer with or spend some time with, tier 2 is the party crowd. You got Coppola, John Ford, Leone, Kubrick, David Lean, Tarantino. That's my party bunch right there. So Tier 2's a banger.
So you're okay with the exclusion of Kubrick for the sake of putting Scorsese in the top?
Oh yeah. If it's my top 5, I'm probably bumping down Kurosawa, which hurts because he's got multiple masterpieces to me. But if I had to choose between Kurosawa and Kubrick, I'd probably go Kubrick.
Okay, and I know we were splitting up few hairs with that one, but I'm surprised that there was really no backlash so far to having Billy Wilder among the top. I think that
It's hard to argue with his catalog.
yeah, and that was my entire point is that overall he just has one of the better overall lengths of a career. He seemed to be very consistent. Most of his movies are held in high esteem individually, let alone as his entire catalog. It's just not a name that I think overall a lot of people would place in that top tier because he's not the Kubrick, he's not Scorsese, he's not Spielberg, the names that are commonly mentioned. But I
People
think
don't look at him as like an auteur.
right. But I think as we've been doing this show, he's the one that I think has come up the most as rivaling, like he's right there for us.
Oh, for
at
sure.
least.
For sure. The knock on Kubrick, if you want to, for somebody who wants to knock him, is just he only made X number of films. Like he wasn't cranking them out consistently. And for some people that bothers them. For me, I'm the opposite. I like the fact that he could spend 20 years between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut. And I revere everything Kubrick did, but I can understand that some of his stuff's kind of hard to get through, for some people.
You don't have to do it now, but at some point in time, maybe you can explain Eyes Wide Shut to me because it made no fucking sense to me.
Save that for 2028.
Well, Eyes Wide Shut will be on a Revisionist Almanac episode next year, 2025, because that's a 1999 film. So I'll be talking Eyes Wide Shut, and you gentlemen, I'll be joining your guys' show early next year for Barry Lyndon. Very excited for that.
I believe that will be your 5th time for your hat.
I hope so. We'll see if those phantom appearances count for 0.5s.
No, because otherwise then it would be the one before that.
Okay.
So unfortunately for your family, you have taken more time away from them in order to be on our show.
And remind me, will this be a first time watch for both of you for Barry Lyndon?
Yes.
Okay. Exciting. All right.
First Kubrick film I saw was Clockwork. And after I watched it, I'm like, what the fuck? And I had to watch it a second time before I kind of got the idea. And then there were certain scenes I still revel in the singing in the rain scene.
So I have to admit, my first one was a much easier entry point. I had Spartacus.
My first Kubrick was 2001, and that was not an easy one to watch as a 17-year-old. But it was one of those where everyone talks about like this is the film or whatever, and so
yeah,
tremendous respect for it.
Any other remaining thoughts for you?
I don't think so. Just in general, love the show, guys. Happy to be a small little part of it here and there. But yeah, looking forward to do some more with you guys. I think we're doing Do the Right Thing down the road and some other stuff.
I believe that's your next appearance is a Do the Right Thing revisit. About the end of July, early August, somewhere in that time frame. But otherwise, tell the people what you got going on and where they can find you.
Sure. So you can find me on all the socials, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, you name it. The handle is at Rev Almanac. And again, look back on past Oscars and determine what they got right, what they got wrong. We basically wipe the slate clean. Myself and all the guests give our nominations, what we think should win. Then that goes to an online poll, and it's ultimately up to the fans to decide what goes into the almanac as the revised winner. Right around the time this episode airs next week, our 1981 episode the voting will be up on that one. Myself and Joe Yar over at Best Picture Cast did 1981, so you can vote on all that. Then, Tom, you'll be joining me next month in June for the release of the 2005 episode, which is the Crash Best Picture win. Not sure you and I will align with that win. We'll find out next week when we record it. And then I'll have both of you gentlemen on 2 future episodes. One in September, we're going to cover 1942. And then I'm going to have you guys on our season 1 finale in December. And we're going to cover 1967. So a couple of really good years that you two gentlemen picked out, and excited to dive deep into those.
Now, because it's a season finale, do I get to present the revisies?
I've got some ideas cooked up in my mind for an end of year special after the finale, where I'm maybe going to have every guest who appeared on season 1 all get together, and you guys can all roast me and some of my picks, or we can look back on all the revised winners and discuss surprises and things like that. So some ideas I'm thinking up, but you guys will definitely be a part of it.
Let's be fair. It's not going to be a roast of you. It's going to be a roast of me, because whether or not I've been on your show, I seem to be a heavy topic of conversation on every episode. I don't understand how I've got such an outsized effect on episodes I'm not even on. But we'll discuss that coming up.
It's the fact that there are moons orbiting your melon head.
You apparently haven't listened, because I am a fixture in each one of these.
Oh, I have listened, and I enjoy it tremendously, because you can ask the most innocuous question and you just get lambasted for it.
You're an easy punching bag, but I say this with tremendous sincerity, and it's genuine. Tom, I love the questions you send, and you obviously have covered a couple. You're going to be covering a couple episodes, got you on a couple more. I know you enjoy taking the deep dives as much as I do, even if you have to watch 40 or 50 films. And I appreciate your questions, and they're always fun to. You're an easy target, but you take it well.
Yeah, I've always been an easy target, but let's move on.
Yes,
Dad, any quick final thoughts for the week?
Just a couple, which is 2 films I saw, and I'm going to be starting to do my own reviews and putting them out on TikTok and such. So I've decided that the best way to do this is there are fun films and there are artistic films. And so I'm going to rate them in 2 different 5 scales. So I'm going to rate it 1 to 5 on entertainment, and I'm going to rate it on 1 to 5 for art, being direction, acting, script, etc. The Fall Guy, 4.5 in fun. The scenes that were shot with all of the special effects and the stunts was just awesome. I thought it was funny. A lot of odes to older movies and to 80s television and such, right down to the $6 million man. I thought that was hilarious. So 4.5. As a piece of film, it just got to a 2 on a scale of 1 to 5 for me. There were major plot holes. The chemistry between Gosling and Emily Blunt was not where it should have been in the first part of the film. My guess is they shot it more sequentially, and they, while they had known each other, I don't think they really had as much of a bond early in the film when they were supposed to be in this in love period as they were towards the end of the film. So 2 and a 4.5 for a 6.5 overall, but you can use whichever you want to as far as your judge. The other is The Challengers. As far as entertainment, I thought it was entertaining. It was not slow. It was at times a little difficult to follow because they were popping in and out of flashbacks at various times. You had to try to piece together stuff. But from a fun point, I would give it a 4. As far as artistic, I'm going to give it another 4. I thought it was well done. The ending left me a little numb because it was a little bit open to interpretation. And I kind of went, I'm not sure what this exactly meant.
There's at least one of us on the podcast who has not yet seen this, so just be careful.
Yeah.
Earmuffs.
I'm not going to say, I'm just saying the ending kind of left me a bit numb. So overall, I'm going to give it 4 and 4 as an 8 overall. I think this has got, I don't know ultimately what the rest of the year will look like, but I think this is one that may be on expanded lists, at least for nominations later in the year, simply because it was tried to be a little daring.
All right.
Let me also say really quickly, we got to get you guys some better movie theater seats up there. What in the world are you sitting in to watch movies up there, Dana? That is an uncomfortable looking seat.
It is what it is. I mean, in Wisconsin Rapids, you do not have a lot of options.
I could tell when Tom sent me the picture. I thought, where in the world are you guys watching a movie at? Because I have about 10 theaters around me, and they all are nice and comfortable and reclined and heated, and that was not that.
It was not.
Those movie theaters are somewhat of a relic of a time gone by, much like the city in which he resides.
Yeah.
So, with that, I will also comment on these. I actually thought The Fall Guy, while it could be fun, and I think a lot of people are having fun with the movie, for me, it was way too winking at the audience. It was way too much tongue in cheek, and it actually dings a little bit of my current Gosling love. I thought he was a little too just knowing the whole time with the perspective of how it was supposed to be. So it didn't ring true for me. It kind of went too far to be funny and hit that right spot for me. It did for others, but maybe not for me. So maybe that's being harsh, but I am the comedy snob. However, Challengers, without saying a whole lot, it is my current number one film of the year. It easily beat out Dune 2, and I will make my bold prediction. It will garner a Best Picture nomination. And the score, screw it. I'll go with a really high prediction here. The score will win the Oscar.
I feel like when it was originally supposed to come out last year, like September or somewhere around there. I feel like if it had come out last year, it would have been in that awards season bubble and would have.
Correct.
I'm a little bit nervous just because of the way awards go nowadays. Like, is it too far removed? I hope not. Like, I want just the best films to be in contention, but it's just a weird release window for it.
Look at all of the Oscars or the Best Picture winners over the last 6 years, with the exception of Nomadland, where we were kind of all stuck in that bubble. Parasite came out at Cannes and built rapport early on going forward. Coda came out very early on streaming in the summer after it had already debuted at Sundance and gotten a rapport. Then you had Everything Everywhere All at Once, which came out in April, and Oppenheimer came out in July. So nothing in this quote-unquote awards window has actually been getting the top prizes over the last several years. So I think it's actually a byproduct of people catching these movies later in their window because they're available on streaming as people start to watch more stuff from home. So with a buzz and an extra added campaign, I actually think Dune 2 and Challengers likely, because I'm not sure what to think of the rest of the slate through the back half of the year, is, there were several things that were outright not going to be there in that window anymore because they got delayed from the other stuff. So the finished products that were supposed to be in last year's award seasons, Dune 2 and Challengers, that could have been thrown in the wash, I think are going to be the quality movies early on in this year and probably have staying power because there may not be there at the back end. Plus, they'll get an extra push because they're in this early window.
I hope you're right. I don't think you're going to be right, but I hope you're right. Like Everything Everywhere, there's the point to it came out early, but it was also left in theaters for an extended period of time and kept increasing. It started small number of theaters, increased. It didn't go nationwide immediately. Challengers is like a big tentpole movie sort of in this window. It's not gonna increase in percentage. It's not a groundswell thing. Dune 2, not a groundswell thing. Dune 2 is more of a blockbuster, and it came out so early. Like I said, I hope you're right. I just don't think that's going to happen.
But then let's look at Everything Everywhere All at Once as secondary challenger, or what most people consider to be the runner-up. Top Gun Maverick. Came out in late May, early June. I think you're still seeing that these early windows are actually better off for these supposed award types movies. And that's actually a good thing for the rest of us as the audience to not have it bunched into 3 months. Spread these things out, give them a longer run time, a longer window for us to be able to see them, have more opportunities so that when we get to the Oscars, they become more important because people have actually seen the goddamn movies.
Again, I hope you're right. I just think the longer we move away from the COVID release stuff affected everything. And I think we're going to start slowly but surely drifting back into the traditional sense of things. And I think Oppenheimer was a sort of an anomaly. I don't think that is going to be the new rule, personally.
I don't think that at all. I think this is the new normal. And I think, it's kind of like when you start dating a girl and she introduces you to her best friend, and it's easy to remember the best friend's name until then they take you to Thanksgiving. And now you're introduced to 15 different family members, and you're all supposed to remember each of those 15 names all at one time. I think that's ultimately what we're seeing here. These films are sticking out because there's nothing in competition now.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you look at just last year's Best Picture nominees, Holdovers was a relatively late release. American Fiction, super late release. Zone of Interest, super late release. Poor Things, super late release. Anatomy, super late release. Maestro, super late. Killers, everything came out fall, winter. Barbie and Oppenheimer are the lone standouts from the summer, my friends. We're returning to normal.
Well, that's not even the point that I'm trying to make as far as awards attention, which is where this conversation started. But Oppenheimer was the front runner for almost all of it throughout, and it was almost unchallenged. So whether you have these late releasing movies, you would have thought in the old paradigm, one of them would have challenged or started to chick off pieces of the armor at some point. It just never happened.
Yeah, I mean, if Dune 2 had come out last year, it could have happened. Honestly, it would have but there was
that
nothing.
Is the exception.
There was nothing massive at the end, and I think Nolan's name carried that. I think Oppenheimer was kind of an anomaly in terms of it was the right movie, right size, right director. It just it relied on the Barbenheimer movement to draw the numbers, and it was a one-time thing.
Any hope we had, really, I think, of going back to the old ways pre-pandemic was neutralized by the writer's strike because it killed off the momentum that was starting to build again.
So I think that's probably a good spot to stop it. Thank you very much, Mr. Corns, for being on in person this time instead of just vicariously. And we look forward to having you back for our later this summer episode, revisiting Do the Right Thing. I know that was one that I was glad to introduce my father to at the time, and he really enjoyed. So I think we have a little bit more nuance that we can really bring to that one this time around. But until then, thank you for listening. I'm walking here. Next week, for our 211th episode, we discuss The Dawn of New Hollywood with the only Best Picture winner to receive an X rating, Midnight Cowboy from 1969, celebrating its 55th anniversary. Directed by John Schlesinger, written by Waldo Salt, music by John Barry, starring John Voight and Dustin Hoffman. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, or review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at the new RonnyDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us at YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GModePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronny Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.